Welcome back to You Can Feel It All Over. This is episode number 5. My special guest today is local Lafayette author Shullamuth Ballinger. You can find her published works on Amazon. First story is Bee Candy. It's a literary ghost story. Her second work is One More Angus Mohr, a memoir and interviews with the band Angus Mohr. She'll also be appearing at Myths and Legends Con in August down in Denver. And if you want to connect with her on social media, you can find her on Facebook, Twitter, or Goodreads, and I'll post all those links on this YouTube page. All right, Shelly, welcome. Cheers.
Hey, cheers, buddy.
How are you today?
Fantastic.
Good. Really excited to have you here. Talk some writing and such. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your works you've done that I've mentioned, like maybe start with Bee Candy.
Okay. Bee Candy was my first novel. It was the book of my soul, right? It's the first thing you wrote, and it's still really good. But I definitely self-published that because no agent wants a literary ghost story, or at least not at that time. They might want it now. And then the second one is I spent a few years following my friend's band, and I followed them up to Bitterroot, Montana, and I went to all their shows, and I blogged about them for a while, and then I took all those blog posts, turned them into a book, and then I was getting divorced. And so a lot of like memoir and my thinking and kind of where I was at the time made it into that. And I really enjoyed the project. Mostly we just sell it to Angus Mohr fans.
That's cool. That's cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Angus Mohr? Give the audience a little, because I don't even know much about them.
Right. So they've been playing together for like 30 years. And the frontman plays the bass, and his son Matthew plays everything, including bagpipes and whistles and organs and guitars and things like that.
Cool.
And they do a lot of traditional Celtic tunes, but they throw a bunch of kind of heavy rock influences into it, and then they'll take some, standard songs like Along the Watchtower and throw some bagpipes in it. One of my favorites is when they do Billy Idol's Rebel Yell
cool.
with bagpipes, or Sedated with bagpipes. Those are things that get you up and dancing.
So it sounds like an interesting project. So how did you approach them saying, hey, I love your music. I'd really like to work with you guys on this. Were you friends with someone in the band, and then it all kind of just came together from that? Like, how did it's really cool sounding to me. Like, how did it all go down?
Well, I used to dance at their shows. Like, I saw them just by accident on a 105-degree day on some blacktop at a cultural festival or whatever. And so we just started following them around, and I would just dance all night, and then I twisted my ankle and I sprained it and I couldn't dance.
Ooh.
And so the next time I went to their show, I was just sitting there and I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the fact that these guys have all been playing together for so long, and that father-son dynamic, and the amount of musical precision, because they practice a lot. And they're pretty dedicated to what they do. So I approached Paul, the band leader, about blogging about them, and we developed a friendship over time, and now when I go up to their shows, it's like meeting up with family. So
that's cool. And then sort of it sounds like also from what you're saying that you in your personal life you're going through a divorce and some big changes, which also I imagine made you kind of reflect on your own personal memoir, so to say. And that kind of bled into the project. Was it kind of healing in a sense, I guess?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think music is fundamentally healing anyway. Not to sound like some weird new agey person, but when my soul needs, some kind of balm to lift it up, I go listen to some music, and that does it every time. There was one time, in fact, I was working on that project, and I was sitting down at the Post here in Lafayette, and I was watching Blues on the Lamb play, and it was right after my divorce had become final. And I remember looking up and realizing, hey, I got married here when this was the VFW Post.
Oh, wow.
And I was sitting almost at this exact same spot. And so that was an interesting kind of mirror image, and it's definitely much happier second time around sitting there, let me tell you.
I can imagine. So did it used to be called the VFW Post? Is that why they named it the Post?
Yeah, I presumably. It used to be the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, and they would the VFW Post would hold functions like weddings and stuff like that, and anniversary parties. And so we got married there. I wanted a dawn wedding, but nobody would show up for that. So I got married at like 7:30 in the morning.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. Quick shout out to all the veterans out there that may be watching this or listening to this. Much respect and love to you for your services. Well, cool. Thinking about writing and stuff, one question that comes to mind is like, for me, I know I love having the opportunity, which I'm going to do next week, to go do like a musical sabbatical where I just cut off the phone and all the technology, and just it's me, the bass, and a great community of folks up at Planet Bluegrass for Rocky Grass Academy. Have you ever taken any sort of literary sabbatical or pilgrimage, so to say?
For me, because I'm a teacher, my summer is kind of my literary sabbatical, right? Like, unfortunately, I'm going to school right now for professional creative writing.
You say unfortunately?
Well, it interferes with my writing time. I was thinking about it, like I'm doing all of these school assignments, and I've been experiencing a lot of tension. And yesterday I realized it's because I want to be in my own little novel world. I'm really excited to be working on the sequel to The Gods of Lafayette.
Okay.
And, which we should probably talk about here shortly.
We'll go there. We'll go there.
And I really want to be in that world instead of this one, so it makes me have a little bit more frustration. But that just tells me I need to cut out some things and make some more time for that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, piggyback off of that, as I think as being an adult, and we're both in our 40s, you know, is interesting as I took a bass lesson because I've been having issues with my like left shoulder and bowing and all this. And like, it was really good because the guy showed me some cool stuff with the bow, but then he was like, we'll start you off on playing C major scale and learning all the positions. And in my head, I was like, I do not. Like, sort of like what you're saying, like creatively, I'm like, I'm trying to figure out some jazz stuff, some bluegrass stuff. I don't want to go back to doing that.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's like, well, there's probably value in knowing where everything is all over the neck, and it might be a quicker way to get there. But it's funny how like, and it sounds like it might be a little for you too, like the teen rebel in me is like, you can't tell me what to do, like, you know. But maybe as creators we need that, to have a little pressure to kind of step out of what we want to do, learn some new stuff, and then all of a sudden that incorporates itself into our style.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, feeding the machine, that's been the great thing with school, is thinking about things in different ways does feed into kind of that writing momentum. I think a lot of people underestimate how effective it is to build your urge to be creative by experiencing other people's works. And I imagine it's the same as a musician. Like, you listen to something and you're like, man, that's incredible. I want to go home and try that. I get some of the same thing. Like, I'm reading something and I'm not necessarily wanting to try what that author is doing, but I'm seeing what they're doing, and then that's feeding my thinking into what I'm working on, and I really want to go home and work on it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that was like, I played this festival in Westcliff, and it was a bluegrass festival, and somebody played like a really cool version of the song Turkey in the Straw. And it was like, I don't know what it was, the way they played it. I don't know what it was, but basically at 12:30 in the night, 1 a.m. in the morning, I couldn't get out of my head, so I actually had to get up with the bass and the bow and try to figure out the melody just to get it out of there. But it's sort of the similar thing, I guess, you know, like hearing something kind of inspiring you, even though it's a tune like Turkey in the Straw. But it's cool. Who are some of your influences for writing and stuff, would you say?
It's going to sound weird, but it's probably my two biggest influences are Stephen King and James Joyce.
Okay.
Which might explain a lot about my psyche, actually. I think Stephen King is an excellent storyteller, and he's really good at creating characters and kind of creating scenes that are very much rooted in place, which really matters to me, I found. James Joyce, same thing. You know, except he's not writing speculative fiction. He's writing very mythic things in everyday life. And in terms of my goals of what I want to accomplish as a writer, that's really what I want to do. And everything he does is very much rooted in the city of Dublin.
Okay.
Whereas what I'm working on right now is very much rooted in the city of Lafayette.
The city of Lafayette. Well, why don't we segue into that? I know, you know, outside of this sort of podcasty relationship, we're also pretty good friends. We're breakfast buddies. So I know a fair amount about you as well. And I know that you have been you wrote a novel called The Gods of Lafayette, and based upon Lafayette and stuff. Why don't you give us a little, kind of, maybe it would be really interesting to hear about would be like, how'd you even come up with that idea? And then maybe a little bit about the story to give people out there a little something, little taste.
Okay. So I'm a Colorado native, and so I've always been in and out of Lafayette. I didn't move here until 2011. And I used to live right over off of East Baseline. And the first thing I noticed when I moved to Lafayette is that there are 1 million rabbits in this town. Like 1 million rabbits.
That's right. Shout out to all the rabbits out there destroying people's lawns and gardens, baby.
And so I kind of had something in the back of my mind, almost from the time I moved here, thinking about how rabbits are a symbol for the god Hermes, right? And so kind of imagining the Greek gods kind of hanging out here. So that was that kernel, and that's been here almost as long as I have. But then there were a couple of other experiences. One was I was sitting in the cannon mine one night. And for me, the cannon mine is like the center of the creative universe. When I need like help spurring a story or putting a couple of ideas together, I go sit on the couch at the cannon mine and have an espresso.
That's good. Real quick, just for those of you who don't know, the Cannon Mine Coffee Shop is one of the most fantastic coffee shops in the town of Lafayette here. It's a very special place. I think the building is like over 100 years old and stuff. But yeah, go on.
Okay, the couch might be that old too.
The couch might be that old too, as well as the beige tables.
And I was watching some people play some music one night, and it was just in that perfect groove, and the summer sun was coming in, and everything just seemed golden and glowing. And I just saw the Greek gods, hanging out and playing music in the cannon mine.
That's cool.
And that was the germination of the story. And then it's like, oh, I guess you can chalk a rectangle on the floor to get to the underworld. And we were off and running. Nice.
Isn't that amazing? The creative process is all it takes is just something like that, you know? I always find that interesting too with like songwriting. You know, you talked about this on another episode, but like, you know, people think of the Beatles and like they have they're so iconic and like these songs mean so much to us. But then you listen to like, interviews with like Paul McCartney. He's like, John and I were just sitting around. Ringo said something like, and we were like, what did you just say? And then like next thing you know, it turns into I Want to Hold Your Hand. You know what I mean? And it's always it's always super cool to me to hear how like the creative process, and that's even cool to know too, because I host the open mic, and there's always, I always think like the iceberg. It's like we see the outside, but like what's going on inside and what's inspiring us to create and come up with all these ideas, you know? For me, those ideas come from espresso. Brought to you by Ozo Coffee. Shout out to Justin Hartman.
Yeah, it's funny because yesterday I was hiking with one of my friends, and I knew I had this story that I needed to write for school, and I wanted to make it a part of the novel. And it was just kind of bopping around in the back of my head, and so when we're hiking, we say it's not a real hike unless she has said some kind of expletive with my name involved, like, you shall. Because I can go forever, and I don't have good sense, and I don't turn back just because it makes sense to turn back. And she has been on many hikes with me where we have had that experience. Yesterday, we decided we would take the shortcut back to the car because we had to park far away from the trailhead. I knew the spur we could take that would just bring us down the mountain closer to where we parked. And it's not very well traveled. And so we're both walking, and we hear a growl.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, surely that wasn't a growl. I want to keep going this way. And my friend turns to me, and she's like, did you just hear a growl? And I'm like, oh, man, if she heard it, then there was probably an actual growl there.
Yeah.
But we just keep walking. And then as we're walking up above, I can hear something moving through the underbrush right behind us.
Oh, my God. And it was a rabbit. No, I'm just kidding.
I turned to her. Oh, no, that was not a rabbit. I turned to her. She turned to me. And we immediately turned around and started banging our walking sticks together.
Wow.
And we went back the way we came. And we were down the mountain about a half hour after that. And she's like, have you learned? I was talking about walking over to the cannon mine because it had been a long day of hiking. And she's like, have you learned nothing about moderation? I'm like, who are you talking to? But that line, have you learned nothing about moderation, fit in with something I had in the back of my head for what I was going to do with this story. And then we were watching this waterfall, looking at kind of the green and white water where it's really fast, and then this kind of tributary pool where it was all slow and golden. Cool. And I just saw the conversation between the two characters happen in my brain. And I was writing that last night at the cannon mine.
Nice, nice. I love your imagery. You're really good at describing all these situations.
Fingers crossed.
I know I'm a visual guy, so it's like boom, it helps me really visualize everything. Well, we're in for a real treat because most of the first 4 episodes have all been local musicians, but since Shelley's a local writer, I thought instead of doing a musical performance, the first thing she's going to do, I believe you prepared a reading from the Gods of Lafayette?
It is.
Okay, cool. So we're going to segue into that right now.
So, the town. Lafayette, Colorado grew up 10 miles from the canyons that lead to the Rocky Mountains Indian Peaks Range. It's an old mining town, a farm town, and an arts town. Some of that spillover from Boulder, most of it is us. Not all the Olympian gods live here. Zeus and Hera decided to jump on that one god Virgin Mother train. Hera was Zeus's sister, not his mother, but she was in favor of any idea that would get Zeus to keep it in his pants and out of other women, nymphs, and wildlife. You can't be monotheistic plus one, with a bunch of your magical siblings and offspring laying about the place, so Zeus and Hera booted everyone down to Hades' underworld for a couple thousand years. Poseidon, old Uncle Earthshaker himself, doesn't like to leave the sea. Aphrodite has a house off of Geneseo and Finch, but she's not really into being tied down when she's not naked. She's usually not there. When she does come to town, things get stirred up. Especially Ares and our boy Adonis. Ares hasn't been around for a while. He doesn't dig Lafayette's hippie vibe. He has one of those giant houses on the airstrip, the next town over. He has his own nightclub made out of a couple of 747s. But he can't help stopping into Cannon Mine some Saturday evenings or hitting up Fate's place on a Sunday afternoon. He keeps away from the cis.
All right, we're back with Shelley. That was a really great reading. Thanks you so
Thanks.
much. Yeah, it's really great. I have a couple questions for you about the writing process.
Okay.
One thing I always wonder is after you've been how has the writing process changed for you after being published? Because Bee Candy was your first publication, is that correct?
Right. Because of a lot of the changes with digital media, getting signed from a publisher is really difficult. And self-publishing is really difficult because you have to do everything yourself. Cover design, marketing, distribution, editing. And so that takes, for me, I have to edit things over and over and over and over and over. Yeah. And distribution is really hard as well. But I will say that having written one novel, writing a second one is way easier. And now I've written probably 6. And each one, you get more of a sense of what your craft is. I think we as writers, in our experience, we try to publish things too soon. Bee Candy is still very good. One More Angus Mohr is very good. But the novels I wrote after Bee Candy, I can look back at them now and say like, oh, look at you. It's so cute just learning your stuff. But now I feel like I have pretty good control and like I'm writing novels that are publishable.
Oh, cool. Like the first one was Bee Candy was kind of like, you're proud of it, but it's like, just wanted to get that out there, all done, go through the process.
Well, Bee Candy
kind of accomplished it maybe, or...
Well, it was like the book of my soul, right? And it was the first novel I wrote. So it's really crafted. Like every bit of it I had to work for and I had to learn how to tell the story. And it was a bunch of little short things that I kind of molded into one thing. So it still stands up pretty well, but it's also pretty short. It's really a novella more than a novel.
How long is it?
Like 76,000 words. So it's just a couple hundred pages.
Okay, just a couple hundred pages. That's great. Cool. Another thing I wonder about when I think about in my own world of music and emotions and objectivity and all that jazz, and this question is more just like opinion based, just to kind of see what you think. Do you think it's possible for someone to be a really good author if they don't feel emotion strongly? So
one of the things I would say is it's very difficult to, as a writer, say what other writers can be. Because we all come at this process from a very different way. I know that for me, I have so many characters on the page because each character is kind of a representation of one emotional state and struggle. and then they interact together, and that makes me really happy.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, represents reality. I think that to be an author, you have to be committed to learning the craft of how to write, and committed to developing your own eye and your own voice. And I think if you do that, then possibilities are limitless.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because I know for me sometimes I have constantly have characters and storylines and all this stuff living in my head, and sometimes I'm like, man, I feel like if writing would probably come more natural to me than playing music in a lot of ways, but the aspects that I love about music are like the social interaction. I love that I can stay here and work on stuff, and then I'm out creating like a live art in a sense, with connecting with other people, and I love all that stuff, and that's kind of what pushes me forward. But there is part of me that's like wonders, like, man, I wonder if I sat down and actually there's, like you were kind of saying, there's part of it like, sure, I have the characters and I can see how these things develop in my head. I get really dorky when I watch movies. I'm not really much of a reader unless it's nonfiction, but I've never really, but I know there's also this craft and this editing process. And there is definitely that with music, where you're working on things and you're constantly like refining. So it's similar in that sense. But the idea of having always to be spending a lot of time by yourself, and I know there's writers groups and stuff out there, but it's still, I don't know, there's just something special for me, at least, about the music thing that I love, that makes me work hard towards that so I can have those moments. But I think that's a really good point you make about like, there is this whole craft to it. And I think that, a lot of times when I think about music, and I'm pretty sure it's probably similar with writing, is like, you have a guy like Stevie Wonder, say, who, pretty much has it all. He's got a great sense of melody. He totally understands harmonic structures. He understands rhythmic stuff. He's a great songwriter. And we always just constantly hear these final products, but what we don't see is like what goes into all that stuff, and I like that you brought that up, because it makes me think about writing that, yeah, sure, like we read final products all the time, but we don't see everything that goes into it. Or like, this is kind of a good segue. Like for you, imagine, you have a relationship where you live with your boyfriend. You also have a full-time job as a teacher, and you also find time to write. So it could be a good segue to think about like, how do you juggle all that stuff? I don't even want to have a relationship with someone, anybody, just because I'm like, it's hard to have a full-time job and just pursue these creative endeavors.
Yeah, relationships are a lot of work. That is for sure. Yeah. I would say that I just want to go back to one thing that you said. You talked about how you have all these ideas and you think about writing stories, but you're not much of a reader of fiction. Well, if you want to write, then you probably want to write nonfiction. I do run into people who say, like, and this is becoming one of my pet peeves, because I'm also going to graduate school with a lot of people who want to be writers, who don't want to revise or read.
They don't want to put the work in. Roll up the sleeves and get dirty with work.
You couldn't play Stevie Wonder without listening to Stevie Wonder. You couldn't play that style of music without listening to that style of music. And so whatever you want to write, you should read that. That's my first advice. And I think that in terms of making time, I read Stephen King's On Writing a few years ago.
It's a great book.
It's fantastic, because it's a lot of memoir and it's a lot of encouragement. Stephen King came from very similar circumstances to the ones I grew up in, and so that was very much like, if he can do it, then I can. Kind of. I haven't done it to his degree in at all, but I'm working on it. And he says, kill your TV. Well, he didn't say kill your TV. He agreed with whoever did say kill your TV. He says get rid of the glass teat. And when I got divorced, I divorced my TV.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm in another relationship, and he came with a TV.
And some video games.
and some video games, so that's all him. But we don't watch it very often, and I think that the biggest challenge as a writer is you have to decide what matters to you, right? I can spend hours scrolling through Facebook, which is why I've blocked it on my phone, because I'm not on this planet to be a Facebook scroller. I'm here to write. And there have been times when I've been like, do I go to a show because I love music so much and it makes me so happy and it just brings me to that altered state of consciousness that I want to be in, that has nothing to do with external chemicals. Like, I get to a place when I'm listening to live music that I don't get to any other time. When I've had to be like, am I a music listener or am I a writer? And then I'm like, darn it, I have to stay home tonight. And so it's all about what you're committing to in terms of time. You have to feed the machine. You have to do fun things. I went and hiked all day yesterday. I didn't write, but it inspired writing. And so it's all about what you're committed to.
I love it. I think you said it 2 or 3 other times during the first segment. You have to feed the machine. It's like that driver that lives in all. I always think about that. This little driver thing that lives inside of me, who's the creative force. You know, maybe it's a similar thing. But do you find that? I know for me, there's like going back to that turkey in the straw thing. There was just something about the performance that I heard that stuck in my head to the point where it was like 1:30 in the morning, and I was like, I just got to get up and play this thing and like noodle it out. Otherwise, I'm just gonna lay there tossing and turning, going you know. But do you find like going out to and I know for me with musically, when I hear like stuff that's moving, it's like, you know, I can go to a late night jazz jam at Nocturne in Denver, and I come home and I'm like, man, I just gotta like, I'm gonna play a little bit before I go to bed, just because it just awakens that driver, feeds the machine. I mean, do you find that the music helps you with that? Like you wake up the next day, you're like, yeah, you know? Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of times I'll hear music that I heard last night in my mind when I wake up, and that helps me get into the place where I was last night when I was thinking about it. And there's some music, like I always have a playlist that goes along with whatever I'm writing. And it will help me get in that place. Like, as soon as I flip the switch on that playlist, I'm in writing mode. And I'm not thinking about the significant other. I'm not thinking about what I'm doing for homework. I'm not thinking about my cats, although I might be yelling at the cats, telling them to get away from me because I'm busy and to get off my mouse and my mouse pad and to please leave me alone. But I leave completely. It could be 600 degrees. There could be construction going on outside my house. But once I'm in that place, I don't leave it until I'm done. And it's my favorite place to be.
Nice. That's cool. That's cool. Here's another question for you. What advice would you have for the younger Shelley in regard to writing?
I think I would have told younger Shelley, because younger Shelley was a bit of a hellion.
That's why we get along so well.
I would have told younger Shelley to not listen to any of the voices that told her that what she wants to do isn't done by people who come from where she comes from. I would have told younger Shelley not to get kicked out of school and to go to college right out of high school rather than, at 28 when I went, or 26. It was 26. And I would tell younger Shelley what my grandma Posey told me a few years later as she was dying, and she said, let nothing stop you. And there were a lot of times, especially going to college when I had 3 young kids, and I felt like I was harming my family by continuing to go to school when I should be working full time, doing something to bring in money. And when I was at college and I felt like I didn't belong with all these middle-class people who were kind of alien to me. But I would hear my grandma say, let nothing stop you. And
that's cool.
So I didn't let anything stop me.
And is grandma's voice kind of, I'm sure there's got to be some writer's block or times when you just don't, you don't want to get into it, or does that voice pop up and...
Well, writer's block is a myth, and we can talk about that here in just a second. But yes, whenever I want to quit something, whenever something seems hard or I'm feeling pouty and I just don't want to, I have a pretty good mental voice that kind of puts me in check and says, come on, grow up. You got stuff to do. What are you here for? What are you here for? Okay, let's go. I can totally relate to that. That happens when things, even music, if I'm working on stuff, it gets so frustrating when things don't come easy to me, because a lot of things, not just with music, but I'm always had to sit myself down and be like, dude, just gotta sit there and put the work in. You know what I mean? Don't be a wuss. Mm-hmm. Don't back down. Mm-hmm. So the myth of writer's block. some of it's avoidance, right? Some people build in all of these like, oh, I have to write the perfect bestseller in one draft in 30 days. No, sweet pea, you don't. Okay.
These are the conversations in your
Well, these are conversations. These are things that I've heard people say.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Or, oh, I'm just not feeling inspired, so I can't write today. Well, you're never going to be a writer then if you're waiting for inspiration. And lots of people say that. Now, there are times when I can feel with a story that I either need to give it more time and just park it in the back of my brain and go for a walk. Going for a walk is the greatest cure for writer's block. If you have writer's block, go for a damn walk. Or I just haven't gotten to where I need to get with it. And that's a feel thing born over experience. And I just kind of relax about it and park it in the back of my brain and do something else that feeds who I am rather than something that's an avoidance habit. I think when you engage in like mindless avoidance, that's usually a sign that there's something that there's a conversation you need to have with yourself to get yourself back where you want to be.
Yeah, I like that. I dig that. Here's kind of a personal question. What was the first book you read that made you cry?
Keith, I have read thousands of books.
What was one of them per se where I still...
Okay, I can answer this one. I can tell you about a book that made me cry hysterically. I don't know if it's the first book. But there is a book called Jack the Bear, and it was made into a movie with Danny DeVito. And there were so many things in that book where I felt like somebody finally understood the way the world was to me when I was a kid. That yes, I sobbed hysterically through most of it. To the point where I've only been able to ever read that book once. So, like, I like to reread books, especially if I really love them. I've only read that one once. I've only seen the movie one time. It's something that just gets too close to home. It was a beautiful experience, but not one I want to go back and repeat.
That's cool. It's kind of, it sounds like you maybe want to preserve it for what it was and don't want to mess that up, not mess it up, but not remember that experience for what it was. I don't want to buy that much Kleenex, Keith. Yeah, I got you. And this next question, I wonder, this is going to sound super serious, but I wonder, was there a defining moment when you were like, yeah, I'm a writer? Do you know what I mean? Like when you're like, this is like a natural, this is like kind of a calling for me, and this is something that is a part of like it's part of me is like just as much as having blonde hair and blue eyes is, So I always wanted to be a writer and a teacher, like always. But I do remember I was about 7 and my cousin Larry John was 10. And we were sitting out on the grass at my grandma's house in Globeville. And he looked at me and he said, I'm going into the Army. I'm going to jump out of airplanes. Nothing's going to stop me. And I said to him, I'm going to be a teacher and a writer, and I'm going to do that, and nothing's going to stop me. Maybe I'm adding on the nothing's going to stop me, but it was that feeling. Yeah. Like, I don't remember word for word. That was a long time ago. But there were times when I would come back to that moment when I would be kind of deciding which fork in the road I wanted to follow. And I've always written stories. Probably... Like, I was bad in school because I didn't want to do what they told me to, so I wouldn't do any homework for the whole semester. And then I would go to my English teacher and I'd be like, can I just write you like 3 short stories and can we call it good? And they were so excited to have, somebody who wanted to write and would do it voluntarily that generally worked for me. That's cool. Yeah, I can remember that when I was in college and I had the ability to either take a quiz on a book or write like a page summary. And people thought I was crazy because I always like to be expressive, and I always opted for the write the page summary because sitting down taking a quiz just seemed like I don't know, waste of time, just dry and terrible, Well, I'm gonna give Shelley a quick plug again here. If you're listening to this interview and you're like, wow, this sounds really cool, I want to learn more about Shelley or get some of her works. She is a published author on Amazon. Her first story is called Bee Candy. It's a literary ghost story. She also has a book out called One More Angus Mohr. It's memoirs and interviews with the band Angus Mohr. She'll also be appearing at Myths and Legends Con in Denver. That'll be in August of 2019. So depending on when you listen to this, you may still have the chance to go, or you may have missed the boat. Also, on this YouTube page of this interview, I'll post her Facebook links, her Twitter links, and her Goodread link, so you can connect with her there. Yeah. What do you say we take a quick little segue into something fun?
Fantastic.
And now, a random pondering by Shelley Ballinger.
Dill looks a lot like Queen Anne's lace. Except Queen Anne's lace gets called Queen Anne's lace because maybe, I don't know. Dill is just dill though. Dildo.
All right. Well, this next segment, questions from Facebook Landia. Unbeknownst to you, I made a post, which I didn't include, I excluded you from, on my Facebook page saying, hey, I'm going to interview a local Lafayette writer. What questions would you have? Like just general questions. I didn't say it was you because I didn't want you to get tagged in it. And I also did the same thing on Lafayette Rocks. Okay. So this first question comes from Christine. She wants to know, when joining any sort of writing group where you are possibly sharing your story with those in the group for critique and input, what is the best way to protect your story from being stolen and used by either someone else or within someone else's work?
I've been in a writers group for about 10 years. I think that when you engage with a writers group, your primary question should be, what do I want from this group? Do I want them to support and kind of bless what I'm doing and give me encouragement? Do I want them to kind of give me encouragement with a couple of pointers, or do I want them to really kind of press this work and give me real pointers? I will tell you that generally you don't really need to worry about somebody stealing your work. As long as you're writing it digitally, you would be able to prove that it was yours first.
Oh, that's true, because it's almost copyrighted when you're writing it digitally if you have a timestamp on it or something like that.
Correct.
Cool. That's a great question. Let me go to the original post. All right, so this next question comes from Jackie. She wants to know when an idea or written piece is general enough that the audience will get it. Like thinking, I get it and it's interesting to me, but do you think about that, like when the audience would get it?
I've actually done some thinking about this as part of my coursework. We had a discussion about it. And interestingly enough, the way to make sure it's generalization, make sure you can generalize it to everyone else, is to make it really specific to you. We're all human beings, right? We all fall in love, we all lose love, we all have to eat every day, we have to provide for ourselves, we all experience death and loss. So we have all of those common things. I think the goal is to just kind of trust in your own experience and be really authentic about whatever you're writing. I write fiction, but I put in a lot of authentic feeling and experience into what I'm writing. And as long as you're being authentic to the way you experience things, other people will probably feel it too.
Cool. Yeah, and it seems to go back to the thing too. It's not like it's going to resonate with everybody anyway, you know? So, but I think that's great. This question comes from Matthew. Ginger or Marianne, and why?
Ginger. Ginger's way more fun, and I'm much more of I see what the world has to offer rather than sit and be cute and just wait for people to adore me. I'm kind of a go out and get it type of woman.
The question's from my man Matthew Gabriel in reference to Gilligan's Island.
Of course.
Ginger was probably one of the legitimate first crushes I had as a little boy, watching all the repeats. Friend Kevin wants to know, he just wrote, Writer's Notebook, how often do you write and what are some of your inspirations?
I write pretty much every day. Otherwise, I'm not very happy. I'm happiest when I can get like 3 hours. That's my perfect like writing place. I think if you're working on a writer's notebook, you should be adding to it pretty much every day, and you should be watching people and stealing their lives and adding your own.
Just to clarify, stealing their lives, not their lines.
No, do both of those things.
And hope you don't get caught.
No, when people are talking to each other and just listening to the nuances of what they say while watching their body language as they interact, and taking that and putting that into what you write gives you something to write other than, she nodded, he winked, she rolled her eyes.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really cool. Just being really aware of like social interactions and how you can transcribe that into relate that to writing. It's great. This one comes from Rosemary. She's always been curious what writers think about technology. Do you see it as helping or not helping the professional field? Do you see a bleak future where print becomes extinct?
I don't think print is likely to become extinct. I'm very much if it works for you, use it. The challenge that I find with technology is that, like a book that I've written and worked very hard to revise and perfect and to hone my craft, can be right next to a book that somebody wrote as an NaNoWriMo, closed the file and uploaded it. And so that part's hard. Distribution is really difficult. When anyone can publish, then trying to make your work stand out is really hard. The pro side is, if I had to type my novels, I would be a poet. So the technology definitely makes creation far simpler. And so it's like any other tool. It's how you use it.
True. And like the last question she had on there is, do you see a bleak future where print becomes extinct?
You know, I think that there's so much value in vintage right now. I think that
that's true. Yeah.
There's also a growing distrust towards having everything digital, right? Like if your cloud goes away and you lose all your music because all your music's in the cloud, you are suddenly impoverished where once you were wealthy. And so I don't think that print is going to die. I think a lot of people who love to read really love to read books. And I think a lot of people fall in love with reading by reading online. I think that I have some mixed feelings about print, because the more things we make that are physical and disposable, the worse we make the world. So whatever we make should be durable. And so if it's a choice between a paperback that someone's going to read once and then toss into the recycle bin versus my ebook that somebody's going to read once and just sitting on their phone for the rest of their lives, I'm in favor of that. So I don't think it's we're not fighting a demon. I think we're having to choose in every facet of our society how we want to go on keeping ourselves alive.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because there's just something nice about a magazine and a book, and it's because we're kind of that crossover generation where we didn't grow up with tablets and iPads and all this stuff. I know for me there was a period of like, this is the coolest thing ever, but now there's a period that's starting to happen where I'm like, there's just something nice about physically having a book in your hand and disconnecting from technology. But then I also agree with you 100%, because then there's the ethical side of me that's like, we really got to think about consumption and print and what's going into all this stuff and relate it to the environment and stuff.
I will say that we've sold far more paper copies of the Angus Mohr book than we have digital. Yeah. Because when we're at a show, at a festival, like I have digital download cards and they burn CDs, and people look at those and they're like, nice, but what they really want is a paper copy that they can have the author sign. Yeah. And so...
And I would wonder too, as far as with stuff like and keeping paper around, if it's more of like, well, what are companies going to do to make things more environmentally friendly? And I think that's always a viable option too. My friend Jeff, who was also a guest on this show, I think he was on episode number 2. He'd be curious in what experience or advice you have for getting published, the process, where to go, what to format, etc., etc., etc.
That's a gigantic question. You have basically 2 tracks you can follow. You can follow the track of traditional publishing, where it's very difficult to get noticed. One of the ways I'm trying to get noticed through traditional publishing is getting the MFA and trying to, even though I'm a novelist, I'm working on some short stories, because if I've sold a few short stories, it's easier to get noticed by an agent. I'm also going to go to the Colorado Gold Conference and pitch to an agent. That's the really hard part about writing. It's not writing novels, it's pitching them to people in a couple of sentences. Yeah. The other option is to go the self-publishing route And there, as long as you are committed to spending a lot of time, you can farm out things. You can pay an editor. It depends on how much money you have. If you have a ton of money, you can pay an editor. You can pay somebody to create your cover. You can pay somebody to format your book. And then you're just, blogging with other independent writers and giving each other reviews. I think if you really are committed to becoming a writer, the more you can do to help other writers, in the long run helps you.
That's cool. Yeah. And that's the cool thing about social media too. Like I've been working the music sort of the Facebook page, and part of the thing I want to do with that is promote other people, Mm-hmm. Cool. My friend Dan wants to know, do you still use a pencil and paper?
So when I'm writing a scene, I need a list of things that are going to happen in that scene, and that propels me through it. I'm not a big picture planner, but when I'm writing a scene, I plan out the scene before I write it quite often. I used to use pencil and paper because I like having what I'm working on and then something next to it that is like my to-do list. But now that I've discovered Scrivener, which is a writing program that I was like, oh, I'm not going to use that. I have a word processor. I don't need no Scrivener. And then I started using it this summer, and now I'm madly in love with it. And so right now for writing most of the time, no, I'm not using pencil and paper.
Okay. It's cool. That's so interesting, too, like how and there's things that I was resistant to, and now I'm like, wow, this makes things way more easier and enjoyable. That's great. This one... Special shout out to my brother Johnny. He's curious about the creative process of writing a book. Like, where do you get some of your ideas from? How are you able to come up with a long story that people keep reading? That's a great question, Johnny.
It is, and when people hear I'm a novelist, they automatically get scared because they think of the page count, right? Like mm-hmm. the last book I finished ended up at about 120,000 words. And I will say that the writing process to get ideas is just keep your eyes open and think about the world, right? Mm-hmm. Like develop your writer's eye, pay attention, don't talk all the time, listen a lot, and then trust that those ideas will come together. And ultimately it's sitting down, writing that first page, and then letting things kind of flow with it. I find that when I'm in the middle of a project, mm-hmm. because I'm thinking about it so much, everything becomes about that project. Like that hike yesterday, because I'm really thinking about the sequel to The Gods of Lafayette, everything kind of serendipitously feeds into it. So I think it's really just being in that relaxed mind state of knowing that your ideas are going to come together.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Trust. I love it. The theme of trust has kept popping up over and over again. That's really great. My friend Dave said, just ask her about fake news. LOL. Some thoughts on that?
Oh, man. I think we are at a point where it is a problem where we've just given up our basic critical lenses and asking questions, right? Like, I write fiction. Everybody knows I write fiction. It says it's a novel, which is fiction, by the way. There are no nonfiction novels. There's novel-length nonfiction, not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And they shouldn't be the same thing. Like, I tell a lot of truth by constructing things that didn't happen in a way that makes that shows something true. And that's beautiful and wonderful, and that's art. It's something else when you deliberately are attempting to manipulate people's minds and emotions through propaganda. I don't even enjoy novels that are where the politics are in front and the story's in back. I always like the story in front because when the story's in front, you are talking to people rather than talking at people. Okay. And I think that we have a responsibility to be aware and fact check things that seem too convenient to our perspective.
Nice. I like that. This one comes from Keith. He wants to know, when Gods of Lafayette becomes a major motion picture smash success and you make millions of dollars, will you remember him and help him fund his Roth IRA from having you on his podcast?
I'll probably still be living in Lafayette, and I'll definitely come back on his podcast show.
Thank you. Keith would greatly appreciate that. Well, we're going to give one more plug. This has been an interview with Shullamuth Ballinger, a.k.a. Shelley. She is a published author. You can find her works on Amazon. One novel is called Bee Candy. It's a literary ghost story. She also has one more, Angus Mohr. It's memoirs and interviews with the band Angus Mohr. If you're watching this and towards the end of July of 2019, beginning of August, she'll be at Myths and Legends Con in Denver. What's the date on that? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's the end of August.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You can just look it up. That's Myths and Legends Con at Denver. And I'll also be posting on this YouTube page for this interview her Facebook link, her Twitter account, and her Goodreads if you're interested in connecting with her. I want to say thank you very much. You're one of my good friends. We have a lot of great conversations over breakfast or brunch. And it's been really cool to get to kind of have a conversation in a different light, I guess, different format. We're going to kind of segue into something. We're going to wrap this all up with a little performance piece. She's got a couple of poems she's going to read, and I'm going to play a little bass behind it.
Yeah, this should be fun. Completely unrehearsed.
It's completely unrehearsed. I know. I get so self-conscious because I have all these people come on here and like I do all these performances where I have no clue what we're going to do. You know, some come out really well, and some I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I put that online. But the idea is progress. It's good. And I enjoy it a lot. But yeah, let's do this. Thank you again.
Yeah, this has been real fun.
It's been a blast.
Jolly go round. The brown grass edges the fault line of asphalt. Metal clips clang against the flagpole. A tether in the wind, Jolly grips the jungle gym ring. Suspended, she sucks sour, sweet watermelon candy and drops. Her feet slap the pavement. Pebbles scatter. Her hands slap the dust from her jeans. It's the wind's fault. The yellow line is a balance beam walked while sweet, sour watermelon melts. Eyes closed, toes point, arabesque. Clang! A rock bounces off the flagpole. Angel makes it ring again. She waves to Jolly. Let's play tetherball. Angel isn't always mean. But a tether of dread drags Jolly's feet. Angel's hands slap Jolly's shoulders and push her into the ring of yellow paint. Faded and cracked with smudgy lines and tar patches. The flag's cling is almost a bell. Jolly spits out the soured sweet. Angel, a head taller, looks Jolly up and down. Sweet bell bottoms, those your moms. Angel strangles the tether rope in her fist. She wings it in a high pole-wrapping arc. Clang! My point, Angel grins. Jolly serves properly, giving the yellow ball a slap that sends it around to Angel, who misses. Not my fault you serve so slow. The rope wraps down to the ball. Ring! Jolly has a point, but knows the score. Ring. Another foul serve. Angel's point. Sadness. sour and sweet thickens. This is a stupid game. A ball locked on a string, the fault of no money, and the belief that all poor people steal. Tetherball, a ghetto game of getting used to chains. Slap. The ball whizzes hard, strikes Jolly in the face. Clang. Her head hits the pole. Jolly falls. Clang. Angel's point. I win. She leaves. Jolly's ears ring. Don't cry. Be tough. Don't cry. Jolly's hands slap away tears. She takes a candy from her pocket. Sweet overwhelms the salt in her throat. She uses the tether rope to pull herself up. Against the wind, she follows the fault lines to the dark ring of fault beneath the merry-go-round. Another tether. But at least, looking up, spinning clouds feel sweet.